So delta liabilities was minus 6,339. So liabilities increased, assets increased. So what is delta NIIP? It was delta assets minus delta liabilities. That is 20,923 plus 6,339, and by the end of the day you get 27,262 millions of US dollar. Now this is weird. We have two numbers. We have this number and we have that number. And the question is, explain why your answer to C does not coincide with the answer to D. Actually, it should be why your answer to D does not coincide with your answer to E, right? It should be D and E. Sorry about that. Is there anything wrong here? Exactly. So the answer is very simple. Delta NIIP is delta NIIP, I called it balance of payments plus valuation effects, or it's the financial account plus valuation effects. Let me give a time subscript, looks more elegant. So that's the point, right? It's the valuation effects, and the valuation effects in the case of Indonesia were substantial. So what you see in the balance of payments is that the assets increased by more than the liabilities, and the difference was 13 billion. Now, in effect, the value of the NIP of Indonesia increased by 27 billion. So the valuation effect itself was something like almost 14 billion. Actually, it was more than 14 billion because it's 14 billion US dollars. So Indonesia benefited big time from either its assets becoming more valuable or its liabilities becoming less valuable. Here's just a small and funny story. When there's a stock market crash in the United States, what do you think does that do to the United States net international investment position? Now, given that a lot of these stocks are owned by foreigners, that improves the American net international investment position because the value of liabilities goes down. Right? That's kind of weird, but that's the logic of the whole thing, right? I don't know what part of the American stock market is owned by foreigners. In Germany, it's about 40%, right? So if there's a stock market crash, then foreigners have less assets, or the value of assets is lower. This is something that does not show, and the value of liabilities of the country where the stock market crash takes place is lower. Now, this is not, and the key thing to know is that this doesn't show up in the balance of payments. The valuation effects are something that is important, but it doesn't show up in the BOP. Okay, now last point, or last question. Problem 3. I don't want to spoil the picture. I mean, a lot of stuff here is shorthand, and I didn't write entire sentences, so I hope that you understand. When you prepare for the exam, that you will still know what I wrote on the whiteboard. There's a trade-off between clarity and speed, obviously, right? And so I leave it to you how to solve that trade-off, right? Some people like writing entire sentences. Some people use shorthand notation. When you use shorthand notation, sometimes I don't understand what you mean. Now, for example, this was perfect. This was kind of here, everything was there, right? So good. Okay, so this is the good old Bergonomics again. Problem 3. The following table gives the price of a McDonald's Big Mac, and since I don't want to get, I have that little R thing, the trademark thing, just because I don't want to get trouble with McDonald's lawyers, because they're certainly very, very powerful. In local currency units, LCU for the United States, Brazil, and Norway in January 2013, as well as the nominal exchange rate of the local currency versus the US dollar. The local currency in Brazil is the real. The local currency in Norway is the kroner. All these numbers are taken from the magazine The Economist. Okay, so you have this is pretty old, but it's 2013. So the first thing is compute the purchasing power parities of the Brazilian real and the Norwegian kroner against the US dollar. So how do you do that? So EPPP, Brazilian real, US dollar, how do you compute it? Mm-hmm.
Divided by the base, which is the price of the burger in USD.
Exactly. So it's 11.25 Brazilian real divided by 4.03 US dollar. Those were the days. Now the burger costs about 5.80 in the United States, but at that time it cost this. And what you get is 2.79. And when you do the same thing for the Norwegian kroner, you get NOK USD, and you divide 43 by 4.03 Norwegian kroner by 4.03 US dollars, and that gives us 10.67, right? That would be in BRL by US dollars, and Norwegian kroner by US dollars. Okay, now do you think that the Norwegian kroner was overvalued in January 2013? Justify your answer. So that's
like the problem set, right? So if you believe in the PPP, then it is. But if provided if you believe in the, I forgot the full name, Samuelson.
yeah, Balazs Samuelson. Yeah, but let's go step by step. You're going in the right direction. I just wanted to add. So let me. Wow, this is very comfortable. I can use a chair to write on the whiteboard, right? So EPPP, the NOK over USD dollar is greater than E NOK US dollar. So in fact, this is like armchair economics, right? I can sit here and teach. I never did that, but I think it's efficient. So purchasing power parity argues that you should have paid 10.67 Norwegian kroner for $1, but what you in fact had to pay was just 5.48. So this suggests NOK was overvalued relative to GDP. However, and now comes the point, relative to absolute PPP. Sorry, what am I doing here? absolute purchasing. Maybe it's sitting on the chair that makes me think slower. Okay. Relative to. Okay, let me push that away. It's not a good idea. You shouldn't see it when you're teaching. Okay, but why Norway is greater than why USA? So higher price of Big Mac in Norway may be explained by Lasse-Samuelsen model. Actually, I didn't check whether GDP per capita in Norway is actually greater than the United States, but it's likely that this is the case. So this is the point. You could say, yeah, it looks like the Norwegian kroner is overvalued. If we believe that the real should cost the same in Norway as in the United States, but if Norway has much higher prosperity, then there's a reason why Norway has the Big Mac is more expensive, and so maybe the NOK is not so much overvalued. Good. So much about the Norwegian kroner. Now here's the interesting thing. Let's turn to the Brazilian real. Do you think that the Brazilian real was overvalued in January 2013? Justify your answer. Now let's compare the purchasing power parity. The purchasing power parity for the Brazilian real was 2.79. The actual exchange rate was 1.99. So I have very little space, but I try to squeeze what I have to say in here. D is E, well, EPPP BRL over US dollars was greater than E observed. So you can write the same thing. The Brazilian real was overvalued relative to PPP, or according to, maybe relative to is not, according is better, was overvalued according to absolute PPP. Now, bring in Per Lasse-Samuelsen. What does Per Lasse-Samuelsen have to say on that? So does Per Lasse-Samuelsen explain why the Big Mac is more expensive in Brazil than in the United States? No, that's the point. For Norway, we can make the point that, yeah, the Norwegian burger is more expensive than the American one. For Brazil, Per Lasse-Samuelsen does not offer an explanation, because Per Lasse-Samuelsen in fact says, no, the Big Mac should be less expensive in Sao Paulo and Rio than it is in the United States. Now, the fact that it is more expensive indicates that in fact the Brazilian real was at that time overvalued. Now, the whole Burgernomics thing has a lot of weaknesses. But it allows identifying those instances where something goes completely against, all the models that we have. A Big Mac being more expensive in Rio and to such an extent than it is in the United States, in Washington or New York, is not compatible with any a standard model. And so looking at that, I would say, no, the Brazilian real at that time was really overvalued. So let me try to figure out how to phrase that. So note why Brazil that's a B, BRA is smaller than Y, USA. So Balassa Samuelson suggests PPP smaller than E, so the Brazilian real was overvalued. Now, sorry about being so short at the lower end. The logic of this argument is, for the Norwegian kroner, you can make the point that yes, Norwegian kroner, the Big Mac is very expensive in Norway if you translate it into dollars, but there's a reason Norway is a very rich country. United States is a rich country, Norway is a very rich country. For Brazil, you can't make that point, because Brazil is an emerging market, and so those Balassa-Samuelson effects do not really help. So in fact, they make matters worse. You should expect EPP smaller than E. You should expect the Big Mac being cheaper in Sao Paulo than it is in New York City. In fact, at that time, it was more expensive. Now, guess what? This episode didn't last very long, and after a while, the Brazilian real depreciated. So this overvaluation eventually was not sustainable. You can see, look at the time series. You have that time span when the Brazilian real, all of a sudden was too expensive, and that lasted for a year or two, and then it went down. And so this is something that didn't come as a surprise. And as an economist, when looking at these tables, I mean, this is orgonomics, right? It's not super sophisticated stuff, but you see, this cannot go on forever. Good. Okay, that's the mock exam, right? And how you'll be trained, right? You'll be trained, and you'll be, and of course, I did a lot of talking in between. So you sit there super focused and in silence. Okay, so let me leave that on for a second. So one thing I would like to do is kind of a group photograph, right? Just we place something, and then I would like to say something to everyone who's also watching. It was really nice teaching this class. I like coming here a lot. Thanks for all your good spirit and for your energy and for your act. Also, I was very impressed, right? I mean, this was probably, in terms of mathematical sophistication, not the toughest course that you had, but it was a lot of material. I mean, it was just, Tuesday, April 1st, we started with principles of balance of payments accounting, and now we've come full, we have done actually a lot. So thanks for bearing with me, and yeah, it was really nice. Also, I fondly remember Monday. It makes you the heroes of Hong King Day. That in my memory. So yeah, it was also nice to meet your daughter, and also to those who are not with us now, take care. Take care of you as well, and the world is small, and maybe we're going to see each other again under some circumstance, right? Okay, so I'm switching off the camera now.